Reem, you talked about it being, the government needed to sort of be in the lead of dealing with the threat of terrorism. Do you see the current state of law policing in this area as being more or less right? Do you think there are more powers that the government should take? Do you think they're taking too many powers? How do you see the current state?
I think Alan was very right regarding giving certain clerics too much airtime. If you look from a cynical point of view, in the past few years, all these rather radical clerics having been invited to important events or given media time, the cynical point of view is, oh well, yes, of course, because the British system wants Muslims to look bad so that the British don't have a problem with the activities that the British and the Allies are undertaking in the Muslim world. I don't agree with that. I think it's quite the opposite, actually. I think the British government got so carried away with the idea of democracy that they didn't realize democracy doesn't mean you have to invite everybody in. What's the point in a socialist government giving the BNP lots of airtime? Similarly, what is the point in them inviting radical Muslims to speak? The problem was, perhaps they wanted to bring Muslims in, this minority, but rather important minority in Britain. They wanted to involve them, they wanted to show that they were being democratic, but there weren't any moderate Muslims to invite, so they invited self-appointed clerics. The reason, as Imran said, there were no moderates is because we were busy living our moderate lives. Now there is a movement, though, and I think the movement only started recently because the threat of these radicals has only become apparent. Before they were just talking. It was all talk and writing, and we didn't take them seriously because as educated Muslims or Britons even, we thought, oh, who's going to listen to them? Lots of people create a stir. They just want their limelight, let them have it. But now, after an actual physical attack where people were killed and hurt, it's moved away from the page, it's moved away from the internet, and it's a serious problem. That's why I'm actually quite happy to say that most of the news channels have invited various people. I too am a trustee of British Muslims for Secular Democracy, and we have quite a good group of trustees, a very eclectic mix, and we're all being invited to speak because the media actually does want us to speak. They don't want Muslims to look radical and bad, and they realize, well, now there are representatives for these moderate Muslims, let's get them on. So yes, I think the main point, in terms of tactical, I couldn't comment because it's a security issue that's far bigger than anything I could advise on. But in terms of strategic, point number one is yes, stop inviting these people. Democracy isn't about being all-inclusive. You have to use certain judgment. Yes, they'll turn around and say you're being undemocratic by not inviting us to talk, but the British government can turn around and say, well, actually, we gave you loads of time to talk, and what you said was against British principles. And we have to also have that. We have British principles. This is our country. Why have we suddenly opened up and said, okay, come and influence what British culture or British identity means. Let's change it to make everyone happy. No, there's a British identity, and differences are personal. There's something that affects what you eat at home or how you greet your friends. But there has to be a solid British identity. Otherwise, what are we? What unites us? Just the passport?
Yeah.
I agree. I think the people of moderation are not generally driven to produce something punchy and in your face that promotes a certain message, and it's people who have extremist views who are more likely to do so. I don't mean to plug my book unnecessarily, but I feel that my own book, Unimagined, is that moderate view. It's about a boy who's Muslim, who's growing up in this country, who's not compromising on being Muslim, but he's also willing to experience and appreciate everything that Britain and the West in general has to offer. And so it's a slow, gentle journey through life. It's not a punchy leaflet with an extremist message.
Why don't I sum up some of the ideas, and I'm not suggesting for a moment we all agree with all of these, of what I've taken out of our discussion. the first point that everybody seems to be agreed on is not to give a platform to extremists, to be much more careful about who is invited to talk as a representative of the British Muslim community. The second, that we are dealing with a social movement, and that has a number of policy consequences. Firstly, that there is a strong case for building and supporting the moderate Muslim groups that have sprung up in response to the bombings in the UK, providing materials for them, helping them in their work within the communities, and that although moderates haven't been present because they do a lot of mowing the lawn and washing the car, that they're not doing that anymore. Actually, they're beginning to turn up for meetings, they're beginning to, they've been woken up. And what the material should contain is this notion of selling democracy, that democracy is the saviour, that there are British values that won't be compromised and won't compromise with extremism. And 2 points where we don't have agreement. One is that there should be much more of an explanation for Iraq, not perhaps an apology, but certainly that we need to go back to that in a much more systematic way of explaining to the Muslim community here what the intention was, what the intervention in Iraq was about, and that there might also be some very serious policing issues that still haven't been solved, that we might need to look at tactically, some more of the powers of the police, that we might actually not have all the powers that we need on a tactical basis at the moment. Is that a fair summation of what we discussed? Does anyone burningly want to say anything to the people of YouTube?
No, there is one. There's one.
Go on.
Hey,
you want to hold up your book?
No. There's one point I want to make a point.
No,
one of the tragedies of Iraq, and how it's been handled, how it's been perceived, and so on, is that it is now not possible for the West to go into Darfur with a very small force and just protect those women. It would not, as a military exercise, it would be facile. A few armoured cars and helicopters just to protect camps from men with guns on horseback. I mean, it would not present any military difficulty at all, or any danger even to our troops. But because of the outcry over Iraq and how it's been handled and communicated, I feel that tragically it's not possible for the West, Britain and America, and so on, to do that. And I think that's one of the tragedies of this.
Anybody else?
I think on policing, one quick point which I think we always fail to frame the new debate on policing with the recognition that there is something really fundamentally different about dealing with a threat that you can't deter through procedural justice. You know, you can't take a suicide bomber to court, you can't deter them with a life prison sentence, and therefore all the things which have been, the innovations which people regard as a breach of their human rights are in fact trying to deal with this totally new issue that all the methods of policing that we had previously just don't address. So human rights remain as important, more important than they ever were, because in convincing people about your good intentions, respect for human rights is one of the absolute non-negotiables with that thin conception of democracy. But how you can do that whilst recognising that the methods which we were using for people who you could take to court won't work here largely. That is a real policing challenge which we are only just starting to explore.